Well, several decades down the line, his fear is manifesting in its strongest form. There is a strong struggle for the continent with China, Russia, and other countries pushing their influence through various means. Shortly, we'll be joined by experts in this area for a discussion on this. First, though, let me tell you how the continent is suffering at the hands of these foreign powers, both individually and collectively. Member states do not pay their yearly contribution to the Africa Union. Now, again, 2/3 of the AU's 2023 budget is drawn from external sources, mainly from the EU, that's the European Union. In 2020, let's say from 2020, member states, partner funds, so member states contributed 46% to the budget of the AU. External funding constituted 54%. In 2021, member states' contribution reduced from 46% in 2022 to 37% in 2021. External support rose from 54% to 62%, meaning EU and other partners were paying more for the sustenance of the African Union than Africans themselves. And then in 2022, the external support maintained at 62%, whilst member states' contribution came down to 36%, and then other sources that contributed to the funding or the budget of the AU constituted 2%. Citizen countries have been imposing a 0.2 levy on eligible imports in order to meet their financial obligations to the African Union. And of course, China's share of total sub-Saharan Africa external public debt has risen from 2% before 2005 to about 17% in 2021. China is now the largest bilateral official lender to countries in sub-Saharan Africa. The Wagner Group, that is a militia wing operating in Russia or has its headquarters in Russia, operates in 12 African countries so far. So this is a stark reality of the issues, relating to the African Union and, of course, Africa in itself. So is it a bad picture, or can we do better to win ourselves from external support? Joining us for a discussion on this matter is Dr. Yao Graham. Dr. Yao Graham is with the Third World Network, and of course, Dr. Ishmael Robo, Internal Relations Analyst. We'll also be joined by Emmanuel Bansa Jr. for a conversation on this matter. Let me start with you, Dr. Graham. So the African Union, as we have it, is supposed to be an umbrella body championing all other matters, including economic emancipation, is fully funded by external sources, the EU and the others. So basically, in terms of our own structures, we haven't done enough to stand on our own. How bad is it after years of fighting for this single goal?
Well, I think that phenomenon is not it's not due to external forces. It's a failure of leadership by African leaders. Because if you look at the way public resources are spent in our countries, Ghana here, since the debt crisis and even before, a lot of discussions about corruption and misallocation of resources and so on. So not paying up to the AU has nothing to do with external sources. That is just a simple failure of our leaders in terms of having the priorities that matter for the advancement of the continent.
So what really is the problem here?
A lack of commitment to an African project. Because if you look again at the priorities people set in country, it is very narrowly defined around regime survival, and there is not a dominant interest of a public interest. The striking thing about Nkrumah when we talk about him and Pan-Africanism is also how the concern for the continent's development was reflected also in what was done domestically. Because whilst Nkrumah was supporting Guinea so that the country would not collapse after the French pulled out, ripped the phones out of the walls because Guinea would not remain a neo-colony. Nkrumah gave them money to help them support to survive, which of course the United Party and it's a military allies denounced as a waste of Ghana's resources. Domestically, we continue to talk about the development vision that Nkrumah had for the country. And if you go around the continent, you find similar leaders who were committed to the African project. So in the same way that Nkrumah, for example, supported the national liberation movement, and also defended African interests in international fora, as well as tried to move Ghana forward, and attracted the wrath, of the ex-colonial and imperialist powers, the US and its allies in NATO. In the same way, people like Nyerere made their countries available to provide support for the national liberation movement and defend African interests globally. And if you go back to Tanzania, people remember Nyerere as a nation builder. So those things matter. What you do at home also usually is reflected in your commitment. And not being able to pay dues to the African Union really is a disgrace as far as African leadership is concerned.
Do you think that perhaps the commentary back then was a bit premature in terms of making it sound like Africa was more than ready to stand on its own?
Well, I mean, Africa, it's not about ready. Does Africa need to integrate? And I think let's not confuse the number. I mean, I think there's a conflation of points there. I mean, at no point did Nkrumah and people who talk about Pan-Africanism see it in terms of autarky, that is being closed off and wholly self-reliant. Africa has to take its place in the world, benefit from the stock of human knowledge, benefit from access to markets, benefit from investments, but these must be done on terms which primarily advance the interest of Africa and its people. Now, regional integration has been an issue because the irrationalities of the boundaries of our countries suited the colonial powers, because their project was not of Africa's development, but which piece of the continent can we get to take resources out? Which piece can we get in which we can create markets for our goods? But when you have independence and you have a thin sliver of land called Togo and a huge desert called Niger, I mean, and a huge subcontinent area in Nigeria, there's an irrationality there. So a West Africa region as an integrated area, Africa as a single market, offers possibilities for development in terms of market, aggregation of resources, joint investment and so on, which are just not feasible in the fragmentation. So African integration as a step in optimizing the resources of the continent for its people, it's an element of Africa being able to develop itself in the context of a world which is moving on and we also move on. So the standing on one's own is not the issue. How do we strengthen ourselves and be more effective in our development and also be able to deal more equally with the world at large, and also therefore more protected against the intrusion and manipulation of foreign powers? That way, of course, then you are more robust and able to stand on your own in the sense that you are economically stronger, you are politically stronger, but not to mean that standing on your own in terms of having an autarkic economy which has no connection to the rest of the world.
Let me bring in Dr. Ishmael Ulovo. He's an international relations analyst. Dr. Ulovo, so for some, I mean, we are just beating ourselves too much. We live in a global village where the superpower will always have dominance over those that are struggling to keep their heads above water. And we should accept the fact that that is what has become the status quo. Is this something that we should accept, or we can do more to improve our situation?
Good afternoon, and then good afternoon to your viewers. I think that is a defeatist position to take. In as much as the world is populated by superpowers who always seek their interests, small powers also find a way to kind of defend their own interests. In Africa, the power we have is the ability to act as one. If we speak with one voice, then we have the power to shape the world. But unfortunately, we have many of our leaders whose agenda is not actually development. They are pursuing other agendas. So in the first place, sometimes it's so difficult to discuss development in Africa because some of the leaders don't have development as a core agenda. So if you have a situation where some of the leaders are virtually being put in place by the superpowers, it's very difficult for you to pursue a common goal and a common agenda. So what is lacking in Africa is the fact that we need a common voice to speak for us. We need to act in unison. None of the African states on its own is able to take on any superpower and win a battle. But if you act as one, then you will be able to negotiate the deals and have a better deals for your people. For instance, if we talk about the natural resource deals that we have signed over the years, which virtually mortgage our resources to external powers and give us very little, if you are acting as a collective, where we have control over all those resources as a unit, we are in a better position to do that. Unfortunately, some of the leaders are pursuing other interests apart from the interests of Africa. And that has been the problem, because even the independent leaders who meant well for Africa from the plans they had and so forth, they were undermined by people who were virtually sponsored by the colonialists to undermine us. So what it is now is that Africa have to recognize that if we continue to pursue the individual state-led agenda, where every country thinks that I am better off than another country, therefore I'm pursuing some development agenda without the others. So your policy must necessarily be linked with the policy of other states, so that collectively you want to get out as a region, because that is where your power lies. That is where your influence in international relations or international politics lies. It doesn't lie in you being a single country, because by your economy, by other indicators, you are too weak to withstand the nature of the global geopolitics and all that is happening around you. So Africa has the strength in the numbers. Africa has the strength in unity. That is the only way to get out of all the problems that we are facing. But then again, the unity has been a problem because of the lack of political will for leaders to surrender so-called sovereignty to the larger interests of Africa. So I believe that the only way Africa will make a statement, will escape the manipulation of the bigger powers, is if African leaders recognize that the development of Africa is their core interest, and that to do that, they need other African nations to act like one. They need other African nations to act in unison. Then they could be able to navigate the current geopolitical terrain.
Has this famous quote when, especially, he is speaking to African leaders, and he always make reference to the fact that Africa, the continent, controls 30% of the world's natural resources, yet we are unable to monetize it to our advantage. What can be done? I mean, Dr. Robo.
That's a problem of resource governance, in the sense that you have not put in place the needed regulatory framework to manage your resources to your own advantage. You are competing among each other for investors whose interest is to exploit you. So unless you are able to put in place governance regimes that allow you to tap into those resources and translate them into wealth, then you will continue to have the resource, but you will not have the effect of development. Because as it is now, various African countries are producing the same or similar natural resources, yet they are having different agreements with various investors. And therefore, the investors are so lucky to play you against one another. So if they come and your framework looks like it's not benefit them that much, they leave to another country. So perhaps look at Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. For a very long time, two of us have depended on cocoa. But we don't have a common way of marketing our cocoa, so we end up competing with one another. To the extent that even in our various countries, we smuggle the cocoa to where we think that the prices are better for the farmers. Because we are not acting as one. If you act as one...
Yes, I was just helping the point that even now we are being told that Ghana cocoa beans is smuggled to places like Togo and Burkina Faso, and they are exporting cocoa, yet they don't grow cocoa there. Yes,
so you can see that among ourselves, we are competing instead of cooperating. So if you pursue this level, then it is easier for any external power to take advantage. Because if I come to Ghana to have a deal in terms of cocoa and I feel like the deal is not favorable to me, there's a next door neighbor who is ready to give me a better deal. I go there. But if you act as one, then you're able to protect the resource you have. You're able to negotiate deals that give the best to your people. But again, the interest of those who are negotiating some of these deals is not the interest of the people they are governing. It's the interest of sometimes the superpower that support them and put them there. It is the interest of sometimes their own finances. They want to live in affluence and all manner of things. So therefore, any deal that give them what they perceive is in their interest is accepted. And of course, any deal that give them the chance to put some road in some corner and put something that will help them win an election become acceptable, because it is not the long-term development of the nation that is at stake here. All they are looking for is political power and how to maintain the power. And if policies are designed to take power and maintain power, development cannot be attained, because you need long-term sacrifice. Because some of the policies you pursue in the path to development may be very, very painful initially. But how do you mobilize your people to understand that some of these policies in the long run will benefit them? That is very important to African nations. But as it is now, the framework we have, which are bequeathed to us by the colonialists, is essentially designed for keeping us the way we are. Because if you look at it, from the borders that we have, which are virtually designed somewhere else, sat down and 3 borders, which have no ethnic rationality, they have no economic rationality, and we keep hold of these borders. We want to develop within the framework of these borders. Our economies under colonialism were developed to facilitate the development of the advanced nation. So if we maintain this structure, if we maintain the way they have divided us and make sure that we develop in the way that only enhance their development, then we'll always remain where we want to be. The most important is to realize that no, our bread is buttered when we come together and try to change the dynamics of what we have been given from independence. And it doesn't lie in leaders who are pursuing personal agendas, who are focused so much on the next election that even policies that they know that pursuing that policy will run us into economic difficulties after the election. But they are ready to do it so that in the next election, they win the power and then they think of what to do next. So sometimes some come to power promising so many things, knowing that those sort of policies will run into economic difficulty, but they believe that, well, you have to have the power. So once they get the power, then they now struggle around to manage it until a certain time, and it continues like that. So we need to have the plans, like the Nkrumahs and like the others who have a long-term vision and plan. If we don't pursue it like that, you go on cycle. If you look at going to IMF, and we have gone in cycles. We go, come back, manage it for 4 years, we go back, because we are not addressing the fundamentals of what is wrong with the economy. You are virtually pursuing the same policies that keep on impoverishing your people and yourself. So we need to get out of that. We need to unite as a continent, better manage our resources, try and negotiate deals that better the life of our people. Places like Obuasi should not have exported gold for so long and remain at the state in which they are. Because in negotiating some of these deals, the development of the local area have to be at the heart of the deals that we are negotiating.
All right. Dr. Hold it there for me. Let me bring in Dr. Yao Graham. So, Dr. Graham, leadership is key in here, because if you have studied the history of the African Union, they've always come up with measures to deal with the very challenges that we are talking about. Even currently, we have the Africa Free Continental Trade Area, which is supposed to address some of these issues, ensure that there's trading among the member countries, so that the money stays here. I mean, beautiful on paper. Even yesterday, President Akufo-Addo was talking about the fact that member states must come together to adopt the mobile money interoperability. So the plan has always been there. It's the case that we have dysfunctional leaders pursuing an agenda that is expected to bring about growth and economic freedom?
I think there is, at the very least, a rhetorical commitment among African leaders to integration. But I also think that in looking at the policies proposed by the African Union, we should also analyze, some of the specifics of some of these policies. Because the European Union and others are not putting money into the African Union simply because they love African integration. We have been paying a price for the support that these bodies give to our regional integration structures. And it is reflected also, therefore, in how, in some key areas, the African Union is seen wanting. Let me take a very contemporary example. The leadership of the African Union Commission decided to give an observer status to Israel. Right. This has become a huge controversy on the continent. Given what the ICJ has told us about the nature of what Israel is doing, Israel today is engaged in genocidal activities against the Palestinian people. Given our own anti-colonial history, how could we even be contemplating admitting Israel into an observer status in the AU? These are moments to show political courage. Israel is still being armed by the United States and the Europeans, even as they talk about Palestinian rights. There's a lot of pressure on African governments at times to support these things. Our own government issued a statement declaring support for Israel. Okay? Governments are under a lot of pressure, and people have to show courage. Even the design of the African Continental Free Trade Area, some of its limitations are due to the fact that we have signed some agreements already, which have constrained our policy space. For example, the economic partnership agreements that African governments signed with the European Union. Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire broke with the rest of ECOWAS and signed a deal with the European Union, undermining regional integration in West Africa and laying a very low bar for the AFCFTA in terms of liberalization. This was because the Kufuor regime at the time felt that it should be on the right side of the Europeans in that context. And let me just make a related point. I mean, I've been struck by the fact that the data that you have presented about foreign influence, it's about Russia and China. Actually, I think that's unfortunate because that's a huge misleading of your viewers and your listeners. Because the dominant powers when it comes to foreign investment in Africa are the United States and European countries. The country with the largest number of military agreements and bases in Africa is the United States and and its allies, including France and so on and so forth. The countries with the largest investment treaties with African countries are not Russia and China.
But you admit that we admit that their influence is growing gradually on the continent.
No. Of course, it's growing. All I'm saying is that all this conversation we are talking about, foreigners controlling the economy, neo-colonialism, and so on, we are talking about the fact that the ex-colonial powers remain the most influential in our countries. The biggest owners of the totality, the Chinese influence in mining is growing. Russia's reach out in Africa is growing. But in terms of diplomatic, economic, political, and ideological and military influence in Africa, we are talking about the West. It is precisely because people are anxious that China and Russia should not come and do to us what the West has been doing to us since the time of slavery. That's why people are concerned. So in having a conversation about foreign influence and dominance, it is important to paint a total picture. The bulk of, this is, I'm just bringing this in.
Of course.
I'm not holding brief for anybody, but I'm saying that the people who have been responsible for the mess on this continent as foreigners is the West. And we should name and shame them. When President Akufo-Addo leaned across from Anthony Blinken and reported Burkina Faso, like a schoolboy talking to a head teacher, reported Burkina Faso as having Wagner troops in its countries. That symbolized the subservient relationship that we have with the United States. The US has access to military facilities in this country that even Ghanaians cannot enter. They are not accountable to us for their military presence. I'm just saying we should have perspective. Otherwise, we create an impression that the dominant powers who control our economies are Russia and China. There is a problem. We should be careful that Russia and China do not become as influential as the West is. If we are going to correct foreign dominance in Africa, is to make sure that China and Russia do not become as dominant as the West is, and make sure that we radically and substantially reduce the amount of influence that the West has in our countries.
Right. Dr. Lovo, you have a comment on that particular angle?
Yes. Unfortunately, Doc, it seems we have already gotten there, that they have virtually doing to us what...
But they don't dominate our economies. They are actors, but they are not dominant.
They
draw
are
attention to the fact that
us.
the dominant actors are the West. That's what I'm trying to underline.
Right.
What the West has been doing to us in terms of where their investments are going.
No, I'm saying the dominant actors, if we want to correct the power relations, the dominant actors are not the Russians and the Chinese, but the West.
Yes, of course they are not. But of course they are virtually approaching that because of the way some of our leaders are thinking. In the sense that in order to correct Western influence or Western dominance, then they think that going fully east, that is Russia, China, is an antidote to Western influence, which is not. In actual fact, the answer to that lies in the African unity or the Pan-Africanist agenda. Because if you look at the countries that have had major dealings with the Russians and the Chinese in the last few years, particularly those who have gone the way of military coups, they seem to have a strong anti-Western element to their coup, and to kind of reduce the Western influence, then they lean heavily towards the Eastern Bloc as if to say that the answer to the long-term influence of Western influence or hold on our economy is to go east, which I think that should not be the case, but rather we should focus more on pursuing a more African agenda as an antidote to both the Western influence and the fear of the Eastern influence.
And how do we pursue that?
I mean, I think I agree with you, but the issue then for me becomes what kind of relation should we have with East or West? I'm not against relations with. I mean, I'm not sure if you are saying Pan-Africanism means that we should not have economic relations.
No, it doesn't mean that.
Because, for example, today, Germany, without access to the Chinese market, they're in trouble. Until recently, China was the biggest lender to the United States. Everybody is selling in the Chinese market. Everybody is producing in the Chinese market. Everybody is trying to access the Chinese market.
Right.
So on their terms. So it is about on what terms do we have relations with these countries. The model that the West established of dominance is the template along which others are trying to come. So in changing that template, it is fundamental that, so the revolt against France in the Francophone countries, particularly what is happening in Niger, Mali, and
Burkina Faso,
and to a lesser extent in Guinea, reflects a revolt against that colonial. I'm not sure that the soldiers in Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso are engaged in a process of, say, a radical transformation agenda, which will move their people away from neo-colonial dependence. Because these are small, isolated countries. So a strategy which actually detaches them from the rest of the African integration project, I think it's unfortunate. I think ECOWAS bears some responsibility for the crisis which has come across. So that what they are going on now, frankly, is a populist reflex against where they find themselves.
Right.
But I'm making...
So, gentlemen, if we can now focus on solutions because we don't have so much time. Let me start with you, Dr. Ishmael Lobo.
Okay, so the solution is simply that as Africans, we need to have an agenda which we define for ourselves.
Have we not always had it? Have we not always had it?
And of course, it's an agenda that we should be politically committed to in terms of determining on our own how we relate to these major powers and having the focus that our interests should be paramount to whatever relation we want to establish. Yes, of course, you can't do without the relations, but you must also be having relations that you clearly define your interest in the relation and put in mechanisms to safeguard those interests. That is the only way. And no African country as it is now can on its own do that. We need a collectivity of Africans politically committed to be able to define where Africa stands, where Africa wants to go, and the relation it wants to have with the external powers.
Dr. Graham?
Yes. One of the key things Nkrumah was concerned about, which remains relevant, is that Africans should oppose foreign bases on the continent because it makes you proxy for superpower rivalries. So Wagner in Burkina or Mali or wherever, we should be opposed to foreign military presence. The US and NATO troops out of Ghana. So no foreign bases in Africa. Two, the principal economic problem that we have on this continent is that we are primary commodity export dependent countries. So the agenda of how we get out of primary commodity export dependence must be the fulcrum around which the African transformation agenda is built at the Pan-African level. And a number of policies have been laid out by the AU, which I think we can highlight as very important. So, for example, the African mining vision and this agenda offers a pathway to how minerals can become vectors of development and transformation, not simply a source of revenue from selling raw minerals, but also raw material that powers our own transformation through building linkages between the mineral sector and the rest of our economies at the regional to scale from the Pan-African to the local. There's an African industrialization agenda which has been put out there, which recognizes the need, the centrality of industrialization. That is linked to the mineral issue I'm talking about, and also to the urgency of an agrarian transition. Because across Africa, the young people are leaving the countryside because there's no work. Because of the primary commodity export dependence, there's other sectors of the economies are not receiving enough attention. So I'm just taking three issues around which a Pan-African approach offers a way of freedom from the presence of foreign troops who can interfere in our affairs, and also two pillars of economic transformation: industrialization and a mineral-based, linkages development, which would, optimize Africa's resources, and also mean that at the moment we export a lot of raw material,
right?
Which means also that it is inefficient. If you take the fact that the West will take 1 ton, a company in Europe will take 1 ton of aluminum, and out of that there'll be fabrication, there'll be jobs created, there's a knowledge economy doing research and development and so on. So our resources that we export in raw form, it's not simply about the material products that come out of it, but there's a whole knowledge and services economy which are embodied and pulled around those things. So we should not be talking the Pan-Africanism in the abstract and that Africa must unite, Africa must integrate. Nkrumah's book, Africa Must Unite, was a transformation charter based on an analysis of economic things.
Sure.
So even to that remains relevant. And I'll just give him 3 examples. Industrializations, minerals and development, agrarian transition, underpinned by freedom from the presence of foreign troops who interfere in our politics.
Right.
And also our leaders should start serving our people rather than foreign governments, as exemplified by the example I gave of President Akufo-Addo reporting Burkina Faso to Blinken.
All right, thank you very much. Dr. Yao Graham is with Third World Network, and also you also heard international relations analyst Dr. Ishmael Holobo. We've been discussing the African Union and how best we can become politically and economically independent. This is a pause here on Joy News. We'll take a short break. Shall be back.